Imagine this: a man born into a segregated society, bound by the chains of injustice from his first breath. A man whose name would one day echo in every corner of the globe as a symbol of hope, courage, and unyielding resolve. His name? Martin Luther King Jr. Now, close your eyes and picture this. Atlanta, Georgia, January 15th, 1929. A world divided by color lines, where opportunity depended on the hue of your skin. In the heart of this world, Martin was born, a beacon of possibility in a seemingly impossible time. But his story wasn't one of immediate triumph. It was a slow, deliberate, and often painful journey of transformation, of himself, his community, and ultimately, his country. What set Martin apart? Was it his unwavering faith, his eloquent speeches, or his boundless ability to dream of a better tomorrow? Perhaps it was all of these, and more. Martin wasn't born a leader. No, his path was forged through a tapestry of struggles and lessons, woven together by the threads of his Baptist faith and his experiences growing up in a deeply divided South. A place where the shadows of Jim Crow laws loomed large, dictating where one could sit, eat, or even drink water. Yet, in the face of such limitations, Martin envisioned something extraordinary. He dreamed of a nation where freedom wasn't just a word, but a lived reality for all its citizens. In his early years, Martin found himself captivated by stories of resilience, the unyielding strength of those who came before him. The tales his parents shared of courage and determination sparked a flame in his heart, a flame that would one day burn bright enough to ignite a movement. Through his rise as a minister, Martin Luther King Jr. didn't simply preach sermons on Sundays. He preached through his actions every day of the week, holding steadfast to the belief that love and nonviolence were the ultimate weapons against injustice. This belief wasn't just philosophical, it was deeply personal. It resonated in the speeches he delivered, in the marches he led, and in the quiet moments where doubt might have crept in, but faith prevailed. By the 1950s, as the civil rights movement began to stir, Martin's voice emerged as a clarion call for change. The Montgomery bus boycott? That was just the beginning. His leadership transcended city limits and state lines, reaching the very core of the American consciousness. And then came the defining moment. The March on Washington in 1963. Over 250,000 people gathered on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, where Martin shared his dream, a vision of a harmonious and equitable future. His words pierced through the barriers of race, class, and ideology. "I have a dream," he declared, his voice resolute and filled with conviction. A dream of children judged not by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. A dream of justice, flowing like waters, and righteousness, like a mighty stream. At that moment, Martin wasn't just a man. He was a movement, embodying the hopes and aspirations of millions. But the path to justice is rarely smooth, and Martin knew that. His life was filled with moments that tested his resolve, countless threats, arrests, and ultimately, the ultimate price. On April 4th, 1968, a gunshot rang out in Memphis, Tennessee, cutting his life short, but forever etching his legacy into the annals of history. Martin Luther King Jr.'s journey teaches us that change is neither swift nor easy. It demands courage, sacrifice, and a dream so profound that it outlives the dreamer. So, as you listen to this story, ask yourself, what dreams are you willing to fight for? What legacy will you leave behind? In Martin's words, "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. And just as he bent it with his unwavering spirit, so too can we." After Atlanta, the next chapter in Martin Luther King Jr.'s life unfolded in Chester, Pennsylvania, a place worlds apart from the deep South he had known. At Crozer Theological Seminary, Martin immersed himself in the profound teachings that would shape his mission and define his legacy. For 3 years, he absorbed lessons on theology and ethics, but it was the encounter with the philosophy of Mohandas Gandhi that left an indelible mark. Nonviolence. It wasn't just a tactic, but a way of life. Gandhi's principles of peaceful resistance resonated deeply with Martin, aligning with his own Christian beliefs and the teachings of Jesus Christ. Here, Martin saw the blueprint for transforming a society rife with hatred and division. Nonviolence wasn't weakness. It was power wielded with precision and moral clarity. But Martin's time at Crozer wasn't solely about academic growth. He emerged as a leader among his peers, breaking barriers that many thought insurmountable. In a student body composed almost entirely of white Southern students, Martin's presence was transformative. His oratorical brilliance and commanding presence led to his election as president of the student body. A testament not only to his leadership, but also to his ability to bridge divides. One of Martin's professors captured this extraordinary achievement in a letter of recommendation, writing, "The fact that with our student body largely Southern in the Constitution, a colored man should be elected to and be popular in such a position is in itself no mean recommendation." This wasn't just an endorsement of Martin's intellect. It was a recognition of his ability to inspire respect, even in an environment where prejudice ran deep. As he completed his studies and earned a Bachelor of Divinity degree in 1951, Martin carried with him a newfound sense of purpose. Yet, his journey was far from over. Seeking to deepen his understanding of humanity's relationship with God, he moved to Boston University. In Boston, Martin grappled with profound questions. How does man connect with the divine? What role does faith play in shaping society? His exploration led him to the works of theologians Paul Tillich and Henry Nelson Weeman, whose differing views on God challenged Martin to crystallize his own theological and ethical framework. By 1955, Martin had completed his dissertation, a comparison of the conceptions of God in the thinking of Paul Tillich and Henry Nelson Weeman, and earned his doctorate. Yet, his time in Boston wasn't merely about intellectual pursuits. It was here that Martin's path would cross with another soul destined to journey beside him. Coretta Scott, a young woman with a voice as powerful as his own dreams. Together, they would form a partnership rooted in love and a shared vision for justice. Martin Luther King Jr.'s years at Crozer and Boston University weren't just about degrees and accolades. They were about preparation, about shaping the man who would soon step onto the stage of history, armed not with weapons, but with words and unwavering faith. He was ready to lead, to challenge, and to dream, and the world was about to listen. In Boston, amidst the pursuit of higher learning, Martin Luther King Jr. encountered the woman who would become his partner in life and in purpose, Coretta Scott. She was a native of Alabama, studying at the New England Conservatory of Music. Coretta's grace, intellect, and passion for justice complemented Martin's own aspirations, and in 1953, they were married. Together, they would build a family and a shared dream of a more equitable world, raising 4 children in a household where faith and activism interwoven seamlessly. By 1954, Martin accepted the pastorate at Dexter Avenue Baptist Church in Montgomery, Alabama. The congregation was modest, but the stage was set for something extraordinary. Unbeknownst to Martin, this city, steeped in the traditions of the Old South, was about to become ground zero for the civil rights movement. December 1st, 1955, Montgomery, Alabama. A day that would echo through history. Rosa Parks, an African-American seamstress, boarded a city bus after a long day of work. When instructed to relinquish her seat to a white passenger, she refused. Her quiet defiance led to her arrest under Montgomery's segregation laws. But this act of courage sparked a movement that would galvanize a community and change a nation. In the wake of Rosa Parks' arrest, local activists convened. They formed the Montgomery Improvement Association, determined to challenge the city's unjust transit system. But who would lead this bold effort? The answer was Martin Luther King Jr., a young, articulate pastor, new to town and unencumbered by local political entanglements. His youth, education, and family ties made him a natural choice, and the risks involved in leading the movement were tempered by his ability to start anew elsewhere if the effort failed. In his inaugural speech as president of the Montgomery Improvement Association, Martin stood before an anxious yet hopeful crowd and delivered words that electrified the room. "We have no alternative but to protest. For many years we have shown amazing patience. We have sometimes given our white brothers the feeling that we liked the way we were being treated. But we come here tonight to be saved from that patience that makes us patient with anything less than freedom and justice." It wasn't just a speech. It was a declaration, a call to action that resonated deeply within the hearts of those assembled. Martin's words introduced the nation to a fresh, powerful voice, one that blended moral clarity with rhetorical brilliance. He offered more than leadership. He offered hope. The Montgomery bus boycott began a unified community effort to dismantle the deeply entrenched system of racial segregation. For over a year, Montgomery's African-American citizens walked miles, shared rides, and endured countless hardships, refusing to ride the city's buses. The boycott was not merely an act of defiance, but a testament to the strength and resilience of a people united by a shared vision of justice. Martin's leadership was tested time and again. His home was bombed and his family's safety was threatened. But he remained resolute, embodying the principles of nonviolence he had studied so deeply. With every threat, every setback, Martin's determination only grew stronger. Finally, after a year and some weeks of relentless struggle, the victory came. The city's buses were desegregated. The boycott had succeeded. What began as a local act of resistance had become a national movement, propelling Martin Luther King Jr. into the spotlight as the moral leader of a cause that would forever alter the course of American history. The Montgomery bus boycott wasn't just about buses. It was about dignity, equality, and the unyielding pursuit of freedom. It was the crucible in which Martin's doctrine of nonviolent resistance was forged, proving that change was possible when courage met conviction. And for Martin, this was only the beginning. The success of the Montgomery bus boycott revealed a profound truth to Martin Luther King Jr. The movement needed structure, strategy, and scope to sustain its momentum. Recognizing the urgency of the moment, he set his sights on a broader vision, a mass movement that could mobilize the South and inspire the nation. Out of this need, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference (SCLC) was born. The SCLC became Martin's operational base, a nexus of faith and activism that united churches, leaders, and communities across the South. It wasn't merely an organization, it was a movement forged in the crucible of injustice, with nonviolence as its core philosophy. Martin's vision was clear. The SCLC would be the voice for the voiceless, a platform to amplify the cries for justice reverberating from the streets of Montgomery to the halls of Washington. Martin's tireless efforts extended beyond the borders of his home country. He crisscrossed the nation, delivering lectures, engaging religious leaders, and forging alliances with civil rights advocates. But it wasn't just America that inspired him. He sought wisdom from movements across the globe. In February 1959, Martin embarked on a transformative journey to India, the land where nonviolent resistance had defeated colonialism under the leadership of Mohandas Gandhi. In New Delhi, he was warmly received by Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru and other dignitaries. But it was his discussions with Gandhi's followers that left an indelible mark. They shared with him the principles of satyagraha, peaceful non-compliance rooted in love and truth. For Martin, these conversations were revelatory, deepening his belief that nonviolence was not just a tactic, but a moral imperative, the most powerful weapon in the fight for freedom. Returning to America, Martin carried this wisdom in his heart. But his gaze also turned to Africa, where nations were breaking free from the grip of colonialism. He saw a parallel between the liberation movement sweeping the continent and the struggle of African Americans against Jim Crow laws. The liberation struggle in Africa has been the greatest single international influence on American Negro students, Martin wrote. Frequently, I hear them say that if their African brothers can break the bonds of colonialism, surely the American Negro can break Jim Crow. This global perspective reinforced Martin's resolve. The fight for civil rights wasn't just an American struggle. It was part of a universal quest for dignity and equality. Martin's faith in the power of peaceful resistance, inspired by the victories in India and Africa, became the cornerstone of his philosophy. Through the SCLC, Martin wielded this philosophy as a beacon for those longing for justice. It was a movement steeped in faith, hope, and the unshakable belief that love could conquer hate, that truth could dismantle lies, and that freedom was within reach for all who dared to dream. Martin Luther King Jr. was no longer just a leader of the South. He had become a citizen of the world, a bridge connecting the struggles of oppressed peoples everywhere. With each step, he carried the hopes of millions, ready to turn the tide of history. In 1960, Martin Luther King Jr. returned to his roots, moving with his family to Atlanta. Here, he joined his father as co-pastor of the historic Ebenezer Baptist Church, a spiritual home where faith and activism had long been intertwined. But Martin's mission extended far beyond the pulpit. The SCLC and the broader civil rights movement were his true focus, and he declared with conviction, "The psychological moment has come when a concentrated drive against injustice can bring great, tangible gains." His words would soon be put to the test. That same year, a wave of sit-in demonstrations swept across the South, led by courageous black college students protesting segregation at lunch counters. In Atlanta, Martin lent his full support to these non-violent protests, recognizing their power to expose the absurdity and cruelty of racial segregation. Late in October, he joined 33 young demonstrators at an Atlanta department store lunch counter, where they sat peacefully, refusing to leave until served. Their peaceful stand was met with hostility. Arrested alongside the students, Martin faced charges that would be dropped for the others. But for Martin, a more insidious injustice awaited. On the pretext of violating probation from a minor traffic offense months earlier, he was sentenced to Reidsville State Prison Farm, a place notorious for its harsh conditions. The news of Martin's imprisonment sent shockwaves across the nation. Widespread outrage erupted over Georgia's blatant disregard for legal norms and the precariousness of Martin's safety. Many were appalled at the federal government's inaction, especially President Dwight D. Eisenhower's refusal to intervene. As Martin languished in prison, fear grew for his well-being, but help came from an unexpected quarter. John F. Kennedy, the Democratic presidential candidate, seized the moment to act. Kennedy, who had already begun appealing to African-American voters, made a bold decision. Through the intercession of his campaign, Martin was released, a gesture that reverberated throughout the country. The impact was immediate and profound. Kennedy's intervention was widely publicized, resonating deeply with black voters and others appalled by the injustices Martin had endured. Many credited this decisive act with contributing to Kennedy's narrow victory in the presidential election just 8 days later. Martin's ordeal highlighted both the dangers he faced and the profound influence his leadership wielded. It was a moment that underscored the stakes of the civil rights struggle and demonstrated the transformative power of moral clarity and courage. For Martin, it was yet another chapter in his journey, a testament to the resilience required to confront injustice and the far-reaching ripple effects of a single act of solidarity. Between 1960 and 1965, Martin Luther King Jr. ascended to the height of his influence. Charismatic, eloquent, and resolutely committed to justice, he became the face of the civil rights movement, his every word and action magnified by the burgeoning power of television. Martin was acutely aware of how this new medium could be leveraged to nationalize and even internationalize the struggle for equality. The cameras captured it all: the sit-ins, the marches, the quiet resolve of protesters confronting snarling dogs and fire hoses. Through these broadcasts, Americans far removed from the segregated South could no longer look away. The brutal realities of racial injustice were brought into living rooms across the country, sparking outrage, empathy, and a growing wave of support for the movement. Martin's philosophy of nonviolence resonated widely, inspiring countless African Americans to join the cause, while earning the backing of liberal whites and influential leaders in Washington. Presidents John F. Kennedy and Lyndon B. Johnson recognized the transformative potential of Martin's work, lending their administration's support to the civil rights agenda. The movement, once fragmented, was now a national force, demanding change with unprecedented urgency. But even Martin's unwavering determination could not guarantee success in every battle. In Albany, Georgia, from 1961 to 1962, he and his colleagues faced one of their most disheartening setbacks. The goal was clear: to desegregate public parks and other facilities. Yet, despite months of protests, arrests, and negotiations, the city's leadership managed to outmaneuver the movement. They exploited legal loopholes and employed stalling tactics, effectively diffusing the protests without conceding to the demands for change. The failure in Albany was a bitter pill, a reminder of the complexity and resistance that defined the struggle for civil rights. But for Martin, even failure was a lesson. It underscored the need for more strategic planning, tighter coordination, and a sharper focus on specific, achievable goals. Martin's resolve was unshaken. He understood that the path to justice was not linear. Every victory and every setback were steps along a long and winding road. Through the lens of television, he showed the world the courage and resilience of those who refused to bow to oppression, and he inspired millions to believe in the power of peaceful resistance. Even in moments of disappointment, Martin's vision remained steadfast. A future where freedom and equality were not just ideals, but realities for all. In the spring of 1963, Birmingham, Alabama, became a pivotal battleground in the fight for civil rights. Martin Luther King Jr. and his allies launched a campaign targeting segregation in lunch counters and hiring practices. It was a bold strategy, but it came at a heavy cost. When demonstrators took to the streets, the response was brutal. Police unleashed snarling dogs and powerful fire hoses on peaceful protesters, many of them school children. The images, seared into the nation's consciousness, were broadcast across the country, laying bare the cruelty of racial oppression. Amid the chaos, Martin was arrested, along with hundreds of supporters. His incarceration in a Birmingham jail was a dark moment, but it became the setting for one of his most enduring contributions to the movement. While confined, Martin penned a letter, an extraordinary response to a group of local white clergy who had criticized his actions. The letter from Birmingham jail was more than a defense, it was a manifesto. With eloquence and unflinching logic, Martin articulated the philosophy of nonviolent resistance. You may well ask, why direct action? Why sit-ins, marches, and so forth? Isn't negotiation a better path? You are quite right in calling for negotiation. Indeed, this is the very purpose of direct action. Nonviolent direct action seeks to create such a crisis and foster such tension that a community which has constantly refused to negotiate is forced to confront the issue. The letter revealed the depth of Martin's convictions and his unwavering belief in the power of nonviolence to provoke moral reckoning. It was both a call to action and a response to critics who questioned the urgency of the movement. Martin reminded his readers that justice too long delayed is justice denied. But Birmingham was not the end. It was a prelude. As the campaign drew to a close, Martin and other civil rights leaders turned their attention to a grander stage. They envisioned an event that would unify the nation's disparate calls for justice and shine a spotlight on the urgency of addressing America's racial wounds. On August 28, 1963, that vision came to life in the historic March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. More than 200,000 people, black and white, young and old, gathered peacefully at the Lincoln Memorial, united in their demand for equal justice under the law. It was a sea of hope and determination, a testament to the strength of collective action. At the heart of this moment stood Martin. His words, rising with prophetic clarity, delivered the message that would echo through history. I have a dream, he declared, his voice unwavering. I have a dream that one day every valley shall be exalted, every hill and mountain shall be made low. The rough places will be made plain, and the crooked places will be made straight. And the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together. It was a speech that transcended time and place, blending faith and vision into a universal call for justice and unity. Martin's dream was not just a dream for African Americans. It was a dream for humanity, for a world where freedom and brotherhood reigned. The March on Washington was a culmination of the movement's strength and the power of Martin's leadership. It was a moment of triumph, a testament to the resilience of those who dared to believe in a brighter future. But Martin knew that the journey was far from over. The dream was alive, but the struggle to make it a reality was only beginning. The momentum of the civil rights movement surged forward, its rising tide sweeping through the consciousness of a nation. Martin Luther King Jr.'s relentless advocacy, alongside the efforts of countless courageous individuals, began to bear tangible fruit. By 1964, the weight of public opinion had shifted, forcing the government to act on the glaring inequities that had long plagued the nation. That year, Congress passed the Civil Rights Act of 1964, a landmark piece of legislation that struck at the heart of institutional racism. The act authorized federal enforcement of desegregation in public accommodations and outlawed discrimination in publicly owned facilities, as well as in employment. It was a monumental step toward justice, a victory for the movement, and a testament to the power of nonviolent resistance. For Martin, the Civil Rights Act was a milestone, but he knew the work was far from complete. The movement had pierced the armor of segregation, but the fight for equality required constant vigilance and unyielding resolve. The year 1964 held another momentous occasion for Martin, a recognition of his leadership that resonated across the globe. In December, he stood on the stage in Oslo, Norway, as the youngest recipient of the Nobel Peace Prize. It was a moment of profound honor, not just for Martin, but for the entire civil rights movement. In his acceptance speech, Martin's words soared with hope and conviction. "I accept this award today with an abiding faith in America and an audacious faith in the future of mankind. I refuse to accept the idea that the isness of man's present nature makes him morally incapable of reaching up for the eternal oughtness that forever confronts him." With those words, Martin captured the essence of his philosophy. He refused to succumb to cynicism, to believe that humanity was doomed to its baser instincts. Instead, he held fast to the belief that justice, equality, and love could prevail, that the arc of the moral universe would indeed bend toward justice. The Nobel Prize was more than an accolade. It was a platform. It amplified Martin's voice, lending international legitimacy to the movement and shining a light on the plight of African Americans. It was a reminder to the world that nonviolence was not only a means of resistance, but a universal call to our shared humanity. For Martin, 1964 was a year of triumphs, but it was also a reminder of the vast distance yet to travel. The Civil Rights Act and the Nobel Peace Prize were not endpoints. They were signposts on a journey that demanded greater strides, deeper resolve, and an unwavering commitment to the dream of a just and equitable world. By 1965, the civil rights movement was at a crossroads. Momentum continued to build, but so did tensions, both within the movement and between activists and authorities. The Selma demonstrations would highlight these fractures, testing Martin Luther King Jr.'s leadership and resolve in ways he had not yet experienced. Selma, Alabama, became the latest flashpoint in the struggle for equality. The goal was clear: to secure federal voting rights legislation that would finally protect African Americans' access to the ballot box. Martin and the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, SCLC, planned a march from Selma to Montgomery, the state capital, to bring national attention to this cause. On March 7, 1965, the first march began, led by John Lewis and Hosea Williams. Martin was absent from this initial effort, and the marchers faced a horrific response. State troopers attacked the peaceful protesters with nightsticks and tear gas as they attempted to cross the Edmund Pettus Bridge. The scene, captured on television and broadcast nationwide, became known as Bloody Sunday. The sight of unarmed marchers being brutally assaulted shocked the conscience of the nation, galvanizing support for the movement. Martin returned to Selma determined to continue the fight. On March 9th, he led a second march across the Pettus Bridge. This time, he faced a difficult decision. A federal injunction prohibited the march, and there were warnings from Washington urging him to cancel the event. Yet, Martin pushed forward, accompanied by 1,500 marchers, black and white, united in their demand for justice. As they approached a barricade of state troopers on the other side of the bridge, tensions ran high. The marchers braced for confrontation, but instead of pushing onward, Martin made a surprising choice. He knelt in prayer with his followers, then turned back. This decision, though rooted in his commitment to nonviolence and strategic restraint, sparked division within the movement. Young radicals, already critical of Martin's cautious approach, saw the retreat as a betrayal. Whispers of a supposed arrangement with federal and local authorities began to circulate, undermining his credibility among some activists. Martin and his supporters denied these claims, but the suspicion lingered, further complicating an already fraught moment. Despite the controversy, the Selma campaign succeeded in its ultimate goal. The brutality of Bloody Sunday and the moral courage displayed in the face of repression ignited the nation's conscience. President Lyndon B. Johnson, moved by the events in Selma, pushed for and signed into law the Voting Rights Act of 1965. This landmark legislation banned discriminatory practices like literacy tests and empowered federal oversight of voter registration in areas where black citizens had been disenfranchised. For Martin, Selma represented both a victory and a challenge. It was a reminder that progress was never without conflict, and that leadership required navigating difficult, often unpopular choices. The Voting Rights Act was a monumental achievement, but the fractures within the movement signaled a shift. The fight for justice was evolving, and so too were the struggles Martin would face in his final years. As the 1960s progressed, the civil rights movement faced a growing challenge: impatience. Across the nation, frustration simmered over the lack of substantive change, and black militancy began to rise. For many, Martin Luther King Jr.'s philosophy of nonviolence seemed ill-suited to the stark realities of poverty and systemic oppression in urban America. This unrest boiled over in August 1965 in the Watts district of Los Angeles. For 6 days, rioting engulfed the area, a visceral expression of the anger and despair felt by urban African Americans. The violence underscored the depth of discontent in the nation's poorest communities, where systemic neglect and racism had bred hopelessness. For Martin, Watts was a wake-up call. He understood that addressing civil rights in the South was only part of the battle. The struggle for justice extended to the economic and social inequities festering in the North. At the start of 1966, Martin and the SCLC turned their attention to Chicago, the heart of the industrial North. The city became the epicenter of a new campaign, one focused on tackling segregation in housing, a pervasive issue that confined black residents to impoverished neighborhoods. This was a different battlefield, one shaped by entrenched economic systems and subtle, yet insidious, forms of racism. Throughout the spring and summer of that year, Martin led marches, rallies, and demonstrations across Chicago. The campaign was ambitious and unrelenting, aiming to expose the stark inequalities in housing and force the city to confront its discriminatory practices. The tension came to a head when protesters marched through all-white neighborhoods, encountering hostile crowds that hurled insults, objects, and threats. The movement's efforts culminated in an agreement signed by the city, a coalition of African Americans, liberal groups, and labor organizations. The agreement promised to enforce existing laws and regulations to combat housing discrimination. On paper, it was a victory, but in practice, the agreement lacked teeth. The city's powerful mayor, Richard J. Daley, resisted meaningful change, and the systemic nature of Northern racism proved far more complex and resilient than anticipated. For Martin, the Chicago campaign was a sobering experience. The challenges of urban poverty and systemic inequity were deeply ingrained, and progress was slow, frustratingly so. The results fell short of expectations, leaving many feeling that the campaign had been nullified. Yet, even in the face of disappointment, Martin's resolve did not waver. He knew the struggle for justice was not confined to the South or to specific laws. It was a fight against the pervasive systems of inequality that touched every corner of the nation. The road ahead was daunting, but Martin remained steadfast in his belief that nonviolence and unity could forge a path toward lasting change. The Chicago campaign revealed the complexity of the challenges ahead, but it also demonstrated Martin's willingness to adapt and confront new frontiers in the fight for equality. It was a reminder that the movement's mission, addressing not just racial but also economic and social justice, was far from over. By the mid-1960s, Martin Luther King Jr. found himself at a crossroads, not only within the civil rights movement, but also in the broader social landscape of America. His message of patience and nonviolence, once the cornerstone of the movement, was now being met with skepticism, even derision, by a new generation of Black Power advocates. These young radicals, clad in blue jeans and armed with sharp rhetoric, viewed Martin's measured approach as outdated and ineffective. To them, Martin represented a fading era, a figure more aligned with middle-class respectability than the revolutionary zeal they believed was necessary. His calm demeanor and suit-clad presence stood in stark contrast to their confrontational style. Even Malcolm X, a figure whose influence loomed large in this evolving landscape, denounced Martin's philosophy, calling nonviolence criminal. Concerning nonviolence, it is criminal to teach a man not to defend himself when he is the constant victim of brutal attacks, Malcolm declared, challenging the very essence of Martin's approach. In the face of these criticisms, Martin made a bold choice. He broadened his mission, expanding beyond racial justice to address the interconnected issues of poverty, economic inequality, and war. On April 4, 1967, at Riverside Church in New York City, Martin delivered one of his most controversial speeches, condemning U.S. involvement in the Vietnam War. His words were unequivocal, linking the war to the systemic injustices faced by the poor at home. The bombs in Vietnam explode at home. They destroy the hopes and possibilities for a decent America. Just 11 days later, at a massive peace rally in New York, Martin doubled down on his anti-war stance. This was not his first critique of the war. He had spoken against it as early as January 1966. But the backlash had been swift and severe. Political leaders in Washington expressed outrage, while segments of the black community, wary of alienating potential allies, opposed his stance. For Martin, however, the war was a moral issue, inseparable from the fight for justice. His vision grew even broader. Determined to address the root causes of inequality, Martin sought to build a multiracial coalition of the poor. He envisioned a populist movement that would unite janitors, hospital workers, seasonal laborers, and the destitute of Appalachia, alongside student militants and pacifist intellectuals. But the challenges were immense. His efforts to bridge these diverse groups failed to garner significant support, leaving him increasingly isolated. The strain of leadership and the changing dynamics of the movement weighed heavily on Martin. By the final months of his life, exhaustion was evident. "I'm frankly tired of marching," he admitted in 1968. "I'm tired of going to jail, living every day under the threat of death. I feel discouraged every now and then, and feel my work's in vain." Yet even in these moments of weariness, Martin's faith remained unshaken. "But then the Holy Spirit revives my soul again," he would say, drawing strength from his unwavering belief in the justice of his cause. Martin's willingness to confront not only racism, but also economic inequality and militarism marked him as a leader of unparalleled vision. But it also left him increasingly isolated, navigating a world where his ideals were questioned from all sides. The man who had inspired a movement now bore the weight of its shifting tides, pressing forward even as the road grew ever more arduous. By the spring of 1968, Martin Luther King Jr. had embarked on his final and perhaps most ambitious campaign, the Poor People's March to Washington. He envisioned it as a demonstration to demand economic justice for the nation's impoverished, a multiracial coalition that would shine a spotlight on the systemic inequalities affecting millions. But fate intervened. A call for help came from Memphis, Tennessee, where sanitation workers were on strike, demanding fair wages and better working conditions. Martin saw their struggle as emblematic of the very issues he hoped to address in Washington, and he knew he had to stand with them. Arriving in Memphis, Martin seemed burdened by an acute awareness of the dangers he faced. Many who were close to him later recalled sensing a profound shift in his demeanor, as though he knew his days were numbered. On April 3, 1968, he addressed a packed audience at the Mason Temple Church, delivering one of the most prophetic and poignant speeches of his life. "I've seen the promised land," he told the crowd. "I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we, as a people, will get to the promised land." It was a moment of transcendent clarity, a message of hope laced with foreboding. The following day, April 4th, Martin stood on the second-story balcony of the Lorraine Motel, where he and his associates were staying. As he surveyed the scene below, a single gunshot rang out. A sniper's bullet struck him, and Martin Luther King Jr. was killed. His voice silenced, but his message immortalized. The assassination sent shockwaves across the nation, igniting riots and disturbances in over 100 cities. A country already fraught with racial tensions now grappled with the loss of a leader whose call for nonviolence had anchored the fight for justice. The accused assassin, a white man named James Earl Ray, was arrested and, on March 10, 1969, pleaded guilty to the murder. Ray was sentenced to 99 years in prison, but his confession soon unraveled. He claimed he had been coerced into confessing and insisted he was the victim of a larger conspiracy. The case, already shrouded in tragedy, now became a matter of controversy. In a surprising twist, members of the King family eventually voiced their belief in Ray's innocence. Dexter King, Martin's son, met with Ray in 1997, publicly supporting his plea for a reopened investigation. When Ray died on April 23, 1998, Coretta Scott King reflected on the unresolved questions surrounding the assassination. America will never have the benefit of Mr. Ray's trial, which would have produced new revelations about the assassination, as well as established the facts concerning Mr. Ray's innocence, she declared. The U.S. government conducted several investigations into Martin's murder, each concluding that James Earl Ray acted alone. Yet, doubts lingered. For many, the killing of Martin Luther King Jr. remains an open wound, a moment of profound loss clouded by unanswered questions. Even in death, Martin's legacy endures. His vision for equality and justice transcends the circumstances of his assassination, reminding us that while the man may have left the stage, his dream remains alive, a beacon for all who strive for a better world. In the years following his assassination, Martin Luther King Jr. became a towering figure of American history, his legacy resonating far beyond the civil rights movement he helped lead. He remains the most widely recognized African-American leader of his era, a symbol of justice, equality, and the enduring power of nonviolent resistance. Efforts to honor King began almost immediately after his death. Through persistence and determination, his supporters campaigned for a national holiday in his name, a recognition befitting his monumental contributions. In 1983, after years of debate and opposition, Martin Luther King Jr. Day was officially established as a federal holiday. Today, it is celebrated annually, not just as a day of remembrance, but as a call to action, inspiring people to serve their communities and reflect on the principles King championed. King's legacy is etched into the fabric of the nation in other ways as well. The Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial, completed in 2011, stands on the National Mall in Washington, D.C., near the Lincoln Memorial, where King delivered his iconic "I Have a Dream" speech in 1963. Streets, schools, and institutions across the country bear his name, and public statues and paintings commemorate his life and work. These tributes emphasize his role as a civil rights advocate, the leader who helped dismantle segregation and secured critical voting and civil rights legislation. Yet King's legacy is not without its complexities. During his final year, King expanded his focus to address broader issues, including economic inequality and opposition to the Vietnam War, stances that were met with significant resistance. These speeches, calling for the Poor People's Campaign and condemning U.S. intervention abroad, have been less emphasized in the public commemoration of his life. Criticism of King persisted even after his death, fueled in part by FBI surveillance files released in the 1970s under the Freedom of Information Act. These files, which contained allegations of personal failings and ties to communism, sparked heated debates about his character. Despite this, extensive archives documenting King's life and work have offered a more balanced and comprehensive understanding of his contributions and challenges. 2 major books, David J. Garrow's Bearing the Cross, 1986, and Taylor Branch's Parting the Waters, 1988, received Pulitzer Prizes, solidifying King's place as a central figure in American history. These works, along with countless subsequent studies, have portrayed King as a complex and multifaceted leader. He was not without flaws, fallible and at times constrained by the very movements he sought to guide. Yet, he was also a visionary, deeply committed to the principles of justice, equality, and nonviolence. Martin Luther King Jr.'s legacy endures not because he was perfect, but because he embodied the best of what humanity can aspire to. His unwavering faith in the power of love and his dream of a world united by justice remain a guiding light. As history continues to reflect on his life, one truth remains undeniable. Martin Luther King Jr. forever changed the course of a nation, proving that courage and conviction can transform even the most entrenched systems of oppression. The journey to establish a national holiday honoring Martin Luther King Jr. was neither quick nor easy. Though his assassination in 1968 galvanized efforts to commemorate his life, the idea of a King holiday faced significant resistance in Congress. That same year, Representative John Conyers of Michigan introduced a bill proposing the holiday, but it struggled to gain traction. The momentum grew slowly over the years, fueled by the dedication of the newly formed Congressional Black Caucus, which included the holiday in its reform agenda. At the forefront of these efforts was Coretta Scott King, Martin's widow. As the founding president of the Martin Luther King Jr. Center for Nonviolent Social Change in Atlanta, Coretta worked tirelessly to preserve her husband's legacy and rally public and political support for the holiday. The King Center became not only a vital repository for Martin's papers, but also a hub of activism promoting his philosophy of nonviolence and equality. Despite the conservative political climate of the 1980s, which might have seemed unfavorable to honoring a figure as controversial as Martin, the holiday campaign gained a foothold. Advocates cleverly emphasized King as a symbol of America's progress in race relations, rather than focusing solely on the radical elements of his activism. This reframing helped garner broader support, positioning Martin as a unifying figure rather than a divisive one. One of the campaign's most powerful cultural moments came through music. In 1980, musician Stevie Wonder released Happy Birthday, a jubilant tribute to Martin. The song became an anthem for the holiday movement, resonating with listeners across the nation and amplifying the call for recognition. Its lyrics, "I just never understood how a man who died for good could not have a day that would be set aside for his recognition," captured the heart of the campaign. The movement's energy culminated in 1983, during the 20th anniversary March on Washington. This march, led by Coretta Scott King and joined by Stevie Wonder, drew a larger crowd than the original March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom in 1963. It served as a powerful reminder of the enduring relevance of Martin's dream and the collective commitment to achieving it. Later that year, their efforts bore fruit. President Ronald Reagan signed the King Holiday Bill into law, officially designating the third Monday in January as a federal holiday to honor Martin Luther King Jr. It was a moment of triumph, a testament to the power of persistence and the strength of unity in the face of opposition. Martin's holiday is more than a day of remembrance. It is a call to action, a celebration of the progress made, and a reminder of the work that remains. Through the unwavering efforts of Coretta Scott King, John Conyers, Stevie Wonder, and countless others, the legacy of Martin Luther King Jr. continues to inspire a nation to strive toward justice, equality, and the realization of his dream. On November 3, 1983, the long-fought battle to honor Martin Luther King Jr. with a national holiday reached its historic conclusion. After overwhelming votes in the House and Senate, President Ronald Reagan, despite his earlier reservations, signed the King Holiday Bill into law. From that moment forward, the third Monday in January would be designated as Martin Luther King Jr. Day, a time for Americans to reflect on his principles of racial equality and nonviolent social change. At the heart of this achievement was Coretta Scott King, who not only spearheaded the holiday campaign, but also secured congressional approval for the establishment of the King Federal Holiday Commission. This body was tasked with planning annual celebrations to ensure that Martin's legacy would be commemorated in a manner that inspired reflection and action. The first celebration, held on January 20th, 1986, marked the beginning of what would become a national tradition. Yet, even the creation of the holiday could not entirely quell debates over Martin's legacy. His status as an American icon grew more widely accepted over time, but controversies occasionally surfaced. In the early 1990s, revelations about plagiarism in some of his academic writings stirred public discussion. In 2009, a congressional delegation traveled to India to commemorate the 50th anniversary of Martin's pilgrimage to the land of Gandhi, where he deepened his understanding of nonviolence. From the halls of Congress to the shores of the tidal basin, and from America to nations across the globe, Martin Luther King Jr.'s legacy endures. The national holiday and the memorial are not just tributes to his life. They are reminders of the ongoing struggle for justice and equality. A call for each generation to carry his dream forward. The legacy of Martin Luther King Jr. is a living tapestry, continually re-examined and reinterpreted by successive generations of scholars, activists, and citizens. While King remains an iconic figure, celebrated for his eloquence, courage, and vision, historians have increasingly highlighted the vital contributions of grassroots leaders in the broader African-American protest movements of the 1950s and 60s. Figures like Rosa Parks, whose quiet defiance sparked the Montgomery bus boycott, and Fred Shuttlesworth, a fearless organizer in Birmingham, were instrumental in laying the groundwork for King's rise to prominence. These local leaders, along with countless unnamed activists, built the networks and nurtured the resilience that sustained the civil rights movement. This broader perspective has led some to question the traditional view of King as the singular, charismatic leader of Southern black protest movements. Yet, even as this nuanced understanding takes shape, Martin's distinctive leadership remains undeniable. His role in the Montgomery bus boycott exemplifies his ability to elevate local struggles into national and historical milestones. Though Martin often downplayed his contributions to the boycott, his speeches and steadfast presence infused the movement with a sense of purpose and justice. He transformed a local fight over bus seating into a defining moment in the battle for civil rights. Martin's enduring contribution to the modern African-American freedom struggle lies in his unique ability to connect black aspirations with transcendent ideals. By rooting the civil rights movement in widely shared democratic and Christian values, he gave it a moral authority that resonated far beyond its immediate goals. His words reminded participants and observers alike that the fight for civil rights was not only just but also consistent with America's foundational principles of equality and justice for all. This moral framing allowed Martin to appeal to the consciences of Americans across racial and social divides, building broad support for civil rights reform. His strategy of nonviolent protest and interracial cooperation was instrumental in dismantling the legalized system of racial segregation in the South, transforming the political and social landscape of the nation. However, as Martin's focus expanded during his later years to address economic inequality and systemic issues on a national scale, his strategies faced greater challenges. The deeply entrenched economic and racial disparities of the North demanded new approaches, and his methods, so effective against the overt injustices of Southern segregation, proved less adequate in tackling these broader problems. Even so, Martin's vision remained steadfast, and his legacy continues to inspire. He showed that justice could be pursued through love, courage, and unyielding faith in human dignity. His life serves as a reminder that progress requires both grassroots action and visionary leadership. If you found this story compelling, you won't want to miss the next video on our channel. It's packed with more epic tales of history and ancestry that reveal the extraordinary journeys of those who shaped our world. Watching and sharing our videos not only helps our channel grow, but also ensures these vital stories are never forgotten. Stay tuned to History Ancestry TV for our next epic exploration. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video, working together to bend the arc of history toward justice. For millions, Martin Luther King Jr. symbolizes the enduring fight for freedom and equality, a beacon of hope in the ongoing struggle to realize the promise of democracy. His life was not just his own. It was a gift to generations yet to come, challenging each of us to dream, to act, and to believe in a better world. And so, the story of Martin Luther King Jr. reminds us that history isn't just about the past. It's a guide for the present and a beacon for the future. His unwavering commitment to justice, equality, and nonviolence continues to inspire movements around the globe. But his legacy is also a challenge, a call to each of us to take action, to stand up for what is right, and to strive for a better, more inclusive world.